how are you guys doing? It's Naya, NWC Counseling, and coming to you guys live on Thursday. Having to use my phone sitting on top of my computer because my computer doesn't want to get its life together. So therefore, I'm using like 5 devices to make one recording. But it's all going to work out, right? So coming to you guys live tonight to kick off and to continue our conversation that we're having for this theme of the month. Now, if this is your first time watching or getting a chance to see this, let me introduce myself. My name is Naya. I am a practice owner, clinical counselor, licensed counselor in South Carolina. And this is literally my office behind me. And I hop on every Thursday to talk a little bit about things and issues that I see happening on the couch behind me. Well, you can't see it because it's weird, but there's legitimate like couch and chairs behind me. So things that I see that are happening in the room, and I get to actually bring them on Facebook and share them so that if anybody is coming across it in their paths and they think that they can relate to the information, it's really helpful. And it helps to lessen the stigma of mental health and issues that really we all go through and that we all have to deal with sometimes, but nobody wants to talk about them or nobody wants to, start the conversation. So I'm starting it. So this month and every month we have a theme. And for this month, the theme is gratitude, contentment. We're talking about finding our happy. And the last time that we met with you guys, if you don't remember, I have to look at my screen and look back down. But the last time we talked about it, we talked about the difference between being complacent and being content. So we tried to understand those differences because we were going to be talking about contentment a lot this month, and I did not want there to be a misunderstanding about what meant what, basically. So if you didn't catch that, you might want to head back just so that you're getting the the best context of how we're using it now. But we talked about that essentially, to break it down in the most basic piece, that contentment was understanding that you're doing good and being happy about the progress that you're making in a particular area or in your goals, but also recognizing that you still had room for growth and like the journey wasn't over. You still need to work more. The difference though was we talked about complacency was thinking that, I've arrived at some place in my journey and I'm pretty satisfied with it. And I no longer need to do anything else in it, in my marriage, in my, as a parent, in my church or my ministry, or in my career, in my finances. As a person, I don't need to develop anymore. So it's kind of that idea that you also were in that same place where you think you've been doing well, but this time you just think you're going to stay there. Like you don't have a desire to keep moving forward with your goals. So that was what we talked about last time. And again, to get more of those details, you want to head back and watch that video. Today we're talking about and finding your happy and understanding about contentment and about joy and gratitude. We're trying to figure out like what are the barriers that prevent us from being happy? Like what are the actual things that come in to play that prevent us from actually experiencing happiness? So many people that I get to work with in my office, one of the biggest issues that people have is that they're just not happy. They're not happy about where they're at in life. They're not happy about who they are. They're not happy about who they chose to be with or happy about the kids that they made. Like they're just not happy. And so one of the things I always talk to people about is trying to understand some of the barriers that prevent you from being happy. Because sometimes, if we're being honest, it's a physical barrier, right? Like we physically can't be happy because maybe there's something happening in our bodies, maybe there's something happening in our environment. And then sometimes it's a mental thing. Sometimes we're not happy because of how we perceive the situation, how we perceive things around us. So there's a big difference, right? So I wanted to bring up today 3 points. Couldn't see my finger. 3 points of why people might experience discontentment or just not being happy. Like what blocks their ability to be happy. The first one is one of the most important ones that I see, guys. And this is going to be having a scarcity mindset, right? So this is a term that I learned from Dr. Brené Brown. And if you know me, you know I'm a big fan of Brené Brown. All of her work, vulnerability, all the things, love her. So this is a word that she uses a lot that I decided to grasp onto, and I have found it very helpful. So scarcity mindset, she starts off, I'm going to read you guys this quote, okay? So it says, we spend inordinate amounts of time calculating how much we have, want and don't have, and how much everyone else has, needs, and wants, says Brene Brown. We are often comparing our lives, our marriages, our families, and our communities to unattainable, media-driven versions of perfection, or we're holding up our reality against our own fictional account of how great someone else has it. So to break that and unpack that for a second, scarcity mindset is the idea that we constantly in our culture think about what we don't have. We're always thinking about what we don't have. And she says this, I don't know if she says it in the book or if she says it in a TED Talk, but she says, the first thing you wake up in the morning and say is what? I didn't get enough sleep last night, right? Then she says you're going through your day and you're like, oh, I didn't get to do that. Or I don't have this. Or I didn't do that. And it's so true sometimes. We can find ourselves in that pattern of behavior where all we're doing all day down that rabbit hole is picking out all the things we don't have. And so she says that a lot of times we're focused on what we don't have because of my next thing, right? Scarcity mindset comes into play a lot because of comparing ourselves to other people. Boy, if I could tell you how many people I get to work with who are just simply unhappy because they're looking at the next person, it would be a lot of people. Because essentially that's where a lot of people's discontentment comes in. They will be perfectly fine with their life until they realize that someone else is doing something differently than them. And people just cannot deal sometimes with the fact that we're not all on the same playing field or even in the same book. Some of us have different talents and skills and abilities. And for some reason, we live in a culture that pushes us to believe that if you don't have what your neighbor have, you might be missing out on something. And that goes back into that scarcity mindset. You start thinking that what tools, what gifts, what blessings that God has given you is not enough. But that's not true. It's like actually an incorrect mindset, irrational thought process, cognitive dysfunction, whatever you want to call it. This is what I really try to help people on the couch understand about themselves. So the last thing that I have on here as far as like what's another tool or what is something that people do that prevents them from being happy is people sabotage themselves. And we've talked about sabotage in like a lot of different areas, but in this context, to sabotage and to undergo suffering essentially means that you can't accept what is. When I used to work at an agency and Sabrina, shout out to Sabrina, she said this quote that like to this day I still think about. But you know how like people would be saying, like it is what it is, it is what it is. She would then add, and it ain't what it ain't. And like, I don't know why that stuck with me for so long, but it's true. So sometimes I'm thinking about something and I'm like, you know what? It is what it is and it ain't what it ain't. And saying it ain't what it ain't, it really helps me to understand the fact that sometimes things just aren't what they're not. And instead of me saying like it is what it is, also remembering that it's not what it's not. Like I can't make things be what they're not. But for a lot of us, we are unhappy because we're trying so hard to make things that aren't. If that makes sense. And we can't. So the three things that keep us in a state of discontentment that we're talking about this week, just to refresh it, is one, having a scarcity mindset, always living in a state where you don't have enough, where you have to keep getting things. Our culture is so focused on materialism and getting stuff and having things. And I get it because I do it too. I'm not perfect, right? But I am in this place in my life where I'm recognizing that stuff doesn't bring me joy. And I'm realizing that having things doesn't make me happy. And so trying to get rid of my stuff is where I'm at in my life. And you might be in this season too as well. But it's a place where I'm recognizing that I don't need things anymore to be happy. It's a good place. Save a lot of money doing that. The second thing is comparing yourself to someone else. If you're always looking at what someone else has, you're not focused on what you have. So focusing on what we have and what we can do is so important. In the Bible, there's that section that talks about the talents. If you're not familiar with it, I'll share it with you really fast, nasty. But essentially, there's like a story that the person is telling in the Bible. I don't remember what chapter this is in. I'm sorry. My Christian friends, I'm sorry. But there's a story about talents and a master. A master gives 3 of his servants talents. And so I like to think of talents as not currency, but I like to think of it as like your gifts and abilities. And he gives to one like a certain amount. He gives to another amount. And then he gives to another person a less amount. So the third person has the less amount of talents, right? They might have, I think they have like 1 talent. The other person had like 5, maybe somebody had like 10, I don't know, something like that. And the person goes out and he says, the master says, I'm going away for a while, but I want you to do well with these talents that I give you. Invest them, do well, do good with them, right? So in the story, basically the master goes away. The person who has actually the 2 people that have like the 10 and the 5, they do well. They invest their talent and they make a return, right? And so the master comes back and he's like, what do you have for me? And the first person, the second person who had the 10 and the 5, they're like, we had these talents you gave us and we did this with it. And it's like, yes, right? And then it was the last person. They're like, the master's like, hey, I gave you 1 talent. What did you do with it? And they were like, oh, you know what? I know you're a difficult person and you're like really high, tense, and strong. So I hid my talent in the ground so that nothing happened to it. And I love this scripture. Like this scripture is like part of my like life. Like this is why I do what I do, is because I believe that I don't know how much talent I was given. And I'm not paying attention to what other people are doing and their talents because I'm trying to please God with what he gave me. Like if it was 1 talent, I'm on Facebook Live trying to make it happen, okay? But all of us have talents. You have a talent, you have giftings, you have skill sets, you have abilities that are natural for you. But if you're so focused on what everybody else is doing, you will never invest in your own talent. You'll never make the best of it because you're so worried about what everybody else has. If that person that had the 1 talent was just focused on trying to make the best of that talent and investing it, I think that's all the master really wanted. But you can go back and read the story and let me know what your opinions are about it. That's what I thought was happening. So in that, there's the comparing ourselves to others and why that's so bad. And lastly is the sabotage and suffering. So not accepting things, trying to force things to go the way you want by resisting it. Like sometimes it just doesn't work. If you're in a crappy relationship, you're in a crappy relationship. It is what it is. And it ain't what it ain't. It's not a healthy thing. So there's only so much that you can do with that, right? So I want you to be thinking about that, but I want you to also to jot down, like, which of these 3 things do you think stuck out to you the most as you're watching this? Is it the idea that you might live in a scarcity mindset, like you always think you don't have enough? You're always thinking about what you don't have. Or is it that you're constantly comparing yourself and looking at what other people have, especially on social media? You're checking out what they're wearing, what they're cooking, what their fake marriage looks like on the outside. I always tell my sister-in-law that when she sees people on Facebook that have a great life, just to imagine like that they have some weird sex life and like they're wearing diapers in bed and because the truth is you don't know what's going on behind people's closed doors. You only see what people present, right? So comparing yourselves to other people is a no-go, but do you do it? Put it down below if you think that's one of the things that you do. Or do you sabotage things? Or do you tend to suffer? Do you put the suffering on yourself because you won't accept what is? So go ahead and jot that down and let me know what you guys think about that. And tag some people if you think that they'd be interested in learning and hearing this perspective and what they think about it as well. If anything, go home tonight and start a conversation with someone you care about or a friend. Or do some research yourself and some soul digging to figure out where you fit with that. I'm off for tonight, but next week we're going over part 2 of why you can't be happy. And so we're going to be talking about the sabotage and suffering in more detail and also dealing with things outside of our control, because a lot of us are completely neurotic, and when we can't control things, we just do really weird stuff. So we're going to talk about that and how that blocks our happiness. So I hope you guys found this helpful. I will see you guys next week. Bye.